It's no secret the hot hatch market is in overdrive. The speed, performance and playfulness you can now get from a city car has never been better. But for some people, that's not enough. A hot hatch needs to exude personality. It needs to be French. That brings us to these two competitors, the Peugeot 208 GTI and the Renault Clio RS Cup. French 4-cylinder hatches at 30 grand a piece. Now Peugeot is something of a real pioneer in this class. The original 205 GTI that laid the foundations for today's 208 really set some solid benchmarks, and even today is still revered as a terrific little hot hatch. So the expectations on this latest incarnation are pretty high. To help its cause, the GTI takes the regular 208 hatchback and then ups the ante with upgraded springs, dampers and a Torsten mechanical differential. It's a sporty machine in the skin, and crucially, it has a manual transmission. There is something really quite fulfilling about shifting gears for yourself, and the 6-speed manual that's on offer in the GTI is quite a defining feature. It helps cultivate a real level of driver involvement from behind the wheel. The cabin is suitably sporty as well. Deep bolstered chairs up front, a mix of quality materials and obligatory lashings of red and GTI badging scattered throughout. On the downside, storage could be better thought out, and the 208 misses out on automated emergency braking. Not everyone will love the size of the steering wheel either. You're getting 153 kilowatts and 300 newton meters, all from a car that weighs only 1160 kilograms. In daily conveyance, the 208 GTI is a really easy car to drive. If anything, I just wish it had a sport mode to give it a slightly spicier option. If you consider the Peugeot a quaint and stylish offering, the Renault is surely the slightly more unhinged and overt rival of the two. Now you could argue that the Cup version of the RS is the sportier proposition of the two. For one, the ride is firmer, the steering is heavier from the outset, and it kind of advertises its potential through the corners probably a little bit more strongly than the Peugeot. The Cup version we're driving sits at the midpoint of the Clio RS stable, priced at $32,490. It sports larger 18-inch alloy wheels, a stiffer Cup suspension and even a launch control function, so clearly it has a sportier brief. The real defining feature with this car against the Peugeot is that this one only comes with a dual clutch automatic transmission. It's all well and good, because when you do choose to put your foot down, it works quite well. It's sharp and it shifts. The car's sporty premise is reaffirmed by performance readouts, including a G-force monitor. Meantime, the cabin reflects the car's purpose with a thick-rimmed steering wheel, double stitching and driver-centric seating. French quirks? There are a few, like the dinky infotainment system and the fact the steering wheel paddles are fixed, which rules out gear changes with any kind of steering lock. Now again, you can kind of put all that stuff to one side and instead focus on the Renault's engine, because it is the real centerpiece like the Peugeot. It's an identically sized 1.6 litre turbo 4, but in this case you're getting 147 kilowatts and 260 newton meters, so 6 kilowatts and 40 newton meters down on its rival. Fuel use is almost line ball for these two, and in honesty, they kind of end up at the same sort of place as sporty hot hatches with a bit of French flair, even if they adopt different approaches. Let's face it, the ultimate way to sort this is at a track like Wakefield Park. These are hot hatches after all. So first up, the 208 GTI. This car is a lot of fun, and with the manual gearbox allowing you to even heel and toe through the corners, it's a really interactive and involving car. You could do this all day. I love the way that it turns in really quite sharply. I would argue probably a little bit sharper than the Renault. Push a little harder, and the Peugeot doesn't quite have the same split personality trait as the Renault. It's got a default driving mode with no sport mode to speak of, which is fine, except when you really want to push on and you ask for a little bit more spice, it doesn't really come forward in droves. That's not to say that this isn't a sporty car, it is, but there's just a little bit more roll, there's a little bit more play in the steering, and while that mechanical front diff does help, it doesn't quite feel as cohesive or as up to the task as the Clio RS. Now, we said that the Renault was the sportier car on the road, so it's no surprise then that on the track it has a slight dynamic edge. It's a little bit more playful, it feels slightly more pointed, and it's a bit more progressive in the way that it slides through a corner if you really choose to push it. So what I've found is that even though it has less power, it actually feels the more lively car under acceleration. You get this beautiful induction noise when you up it for a rent. And it actually has quite a high rev ceiling at 6,500 RPM. Now this car's brakes, its stiffer dampers and its cup chassis really complement one another on a track. It just feels quite pointed between corners, but saying that, to get this car to really come alive, you got to put it into race mode. The car all of a sudden comes to life. It becomes more playful, it becomes more interactive between corners, and it becomes a lot more fun. I think a track is really where the RS starts to make a lot more sense. Yes, on the road it might not be as soft or well appointed as the Peugeot, but if you're buying one of these cars for thrills, well, this one's hard to look past. If you're in the market for a French hot hatch, you're probably looking to put up with a little bit of compromise. In the case of the Peugeot, that means losing 2 doors and putting up with a manual transmission. The Clio RS, it's a firmer ride, sportier premise, and no manual transmission. But the brief for this assignment was which was the better hot hatch, and inherently, which one made you feel better behind the wheel. And that mantle undoubtedly rests with the Clio RS Cup.